Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Professor Bipin Jojo from School of Social Work at Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Today we are going to talk about understanding rurality in Indian society, which is part of the course Rural Development. As part of this lesson today, we will try to understand different institutions in our rural society, like family, marriage, patriarchy, economy, and social classes in rural India. As we know, the rural society has different institutions, and family is the first and foremost and the basic foundation of our society. We have different kinds of families. Nuclear families, where generally we find parents, mother, father, and children. At the same time, we also have joint families, where we have the extended families, where the parents, children, uncle, aunts, grandparents, we all belong together. They live together as part of the same family. When we see that, how do we define family? One can see different definitions. However, one of the definitions says that a family is a group defined by a sex relationship, sufficiently precise and enduring to provide for procreation and upbringing of children. Family plays very significant role in our society. As I said, it is very important institutions. It establishes relationship between two adults of opposite sex, with limited exceptions in case of gays or lesbians. It also sanctions for establishing sexual relationship and governs other kind of social and economic obligations in order to take care of the family, to provide food, provide security to the children, provide housing, and at the same time it also enjoys certain kind of privileges. As elders, certain kind of privileges they enjoy. As children, there are certain kind of privileges. At the same time, there are certain duties for adults as well as children. At the same time, different gender group or different sex group, they have this kind of obligations. Now, gender, along with the gender, when we talk, in India, generally it is a male-dominated society. Our families are generally dominated by the male members, with a few exceptions in society like in Kerala or in some of the states like Meghalaya in the northeast, where the female dominates or the female plays very important role in terms of taking decisions in the family matter. But in general, the male dominates in our Indian society in all decision-making affairs, and so he dominates. And so when we talk of sex in the family or gender in the family, it has got two connotations. Whenever we talk about sex, it is a biological connotation, male and female. At the same time, when we talk sociologically, this relationship between male and female, we refer generally the gender relations, the relation between man and woman, not merely as biological relation, but as a sociological phenomenon. It is a relationship or interaction between two human beings. And so gender is looked at more of a sociological phenomena, and the sex is looked at more as biological phenomena. In Indian rural India or in general Indian society, there is huge amount of gender discrimination. based on aptitudes, based on abilities, based on physical strength. There are a huge number of discrimination, or the different ways, different forms of discrimination one can see based on gender. And so, all the time, patriarchy is prevailing in our Indian society, where the man dominates, and the man commands the rule of the family, and so father becomes very, very prominent or very dominant figure. And so our Indian families are male-dominated families. As I said, with the exception of, say, Meghalaya, or some families or some societies in Kerala, where the families are not male-dominated, but women-dominated or female-dominated. Many scholars have tried to analyze patriarchy or gender relations. But some of the feminists try to conceptualize and analyze different ways. Now, feminists would look at that this patriarchy is merely domination based on the private property. It is, especially the Marxist feminist, they would look at that subordination of women is developed historically with the development of the private property. Similarly, when we see the patriarchy is dominant by means of which the oppressed is executed. Okay, so when the feminism is being talked more and more today in the Indian gender relations, feminism trying to urge that the realization of the dominant power of male in the society and the subordination of women to the main power. And there is huge debate between this kind of gender relationship with reference to Indian society as well as outside. And so, along with the family, gender relationship or the patriarchy becomes one of the very, very important aspects when we are discussing about Indian society. Our Indian society is not only stratified based on caste lines or are not divided based on any caste-based lines. The Indian society also can be looked at or stratified based on the economic criteria. Traditionally, Indian society is known for caste society, and so our social stratification is around caste, which we have discussed in the previous lesson. But one can also discuss and elaborate to see that how Indian society can also be stratified based on the economic criteria, and so it is beyond social criteria called caste. Like some of the scholars like A.R. Desai has tried to use the Marxian theory to analyze the Indian class structure, especially the agrarian relationship, because based on the agrarian relationship, the scholar A.R. Desai has tried to analyze that how there is the social structure in the Indian society is around the agrarian relationship, like the people who have land, the people who do not have land, or the people who have more land or the people who have less land, and the people who do not have land. Because those people who have more land, they are likely or most likely to command economic power, more economic power than having less land or no land. Because the economic power determines their social power. And so based on that economic power, they also started commanding their social structure or their social power. And so that's where the Indian society is being analyzed, or it is analyzed from the economic point of view, from the social, from the economic structure as well. And so one tries to see that, or one can find that class structure has roots in its own history and tradition, which starts from the mode of production and ownership. Who owned land? Who command the mode of production? Or who owns the means of production? And so it has been seen that the people who had more land, like landlords, or the rich farmers, who owned the means of production, where the landless people or the people who did not have much land, they had to work with these landlords or the big landowners. And so the whole power or the stratification within the village or the Indian rural village was determined based on this economic power. The people who had land, the people who did not have land. The people who had more land, they commanded that economic power. And so based on that, the social structure also got defined. Similarly, one can see that the land holding pattern is determined based on this ownership, the peasant proprietors. And under this Rurality system, in the Madras and Bombay presidency during this colonial rule, the ownership of land was vested on the peasants. As the colonial rulers came to India and invaded India, or they ruled India, and in the rural areas, the resources what they had was the land and the forest. And so they tried to give the ownership of the land to different proprietors, and which was known as Rurality settlement or system, through which they tried to generate the land tax and land revenue, and that determined another way of social structure based on this land holding pattern. Though this land holding or this settlement was not permanent settlement, it was revised time to time every 20 to 30 years. And so today maybe somebody held certain amount of land and which was given the ownership of certain amount of land as proprietor of to cultivate the land. After 20 years or 30 years, it got revised under this British rule, and sometimes same person continued, sometimes the new person was given that proprietorship, depending on the amount of land revenue they could generate or they could earn from there. And so this was not homogeneous. This land proprietorship, or the peasants who held this land, was not homogeneous. One particular family or one particular person did not own that land permanently. And so they belong to different castes or different groups or different communities. And so it was very, very heterogeneous and not permanent. So sometimes the rich had large holdings. Sometimes these large holdings were splitted further, and so they were splitted into smaller holdings, and so they were given to those different peasants, and so there were medium-sized holdings. And there were some poor peasants who were having very small amount of land or meager amount of land, which was not sufficient even to maintain their family. And so one can see that there were different kinds of land holding patterns. There were large land holding, there were middle-sized land holding, there was poor peasants who had small amount of land holding, or sometimes there were people who were just working with these landholders, the farms or the agricultural lands, and they were kind of without land. At the same time, we also find historically the zamindari systems, which was created during this British period again. And this zamindari system was nothing but a tenant system. The zamindars who were bestowed certain amount of authority or the rights over certain villages or certain areas to look after the land and collect land revenue, extracting land revenue or rent from the small tenants or middle level of landholders. So Jamindars basically enjoyed the power which was bestowed by the Britishers to extract rents from the small or the marginal farmers. And during in this process, people, those who failed to give the land rent or the land revenue, they were evicted from their ownership or their proprietorship. And so many times they got replaced by the new proprietors, one who could pay higher rents. So everything got determined based on the rent, the land revenue. One who could pay could get the proprietorship. The moment they were not able to pay land revenue, their proprietorship changed, and so in that process, sometimes landholders became marginal landholders, or sometimes marginal landholders became landless. So there were two kinds of these tenants which were provided under the power of Jamindars. One is tenants under the lease of landholding, and the second group was subtenants. Like one farmer has been given the tenancy of cultivating, say, 20 acres of land. And that farmer sublets that 20 acres of land maybe between 3 or 4 farmers. And so there is one large tenant and he or she sublets that land among the 3 or 4 subtenants. So there were these kind of tenants and subtenants under these zamindari systems. And the lowest among this hierarchy was the sharecroppers. There were a group of people who did not have land. And so what they had was they had the labor. So they could go and share the land. Somebody owns that land and somebody doesn't own land that, and so he or she goes and cultivates that land. So whatever the produces come, that gets shared between the landowner and the person who cultivates the land. Most of the time, this kind of sharecropping is not in the interest or not in the favor of the sharecropper, because the terms condition get decided by the landholder. And so the landholder sometimes would say that, no, I would take 2/3 of the produce. And so 1/3 of the produce the sharecropper has to live with or manage the whole family. And so in that process, since he did not have land, the sharecropper had to go by the terms condition of the landholders or the tenants, whatever they decided. And so in this process, one sees that whole of this land administration in rural India gets determined by the authority of zamindars, authority of proprietorship, and also in that process, another group is created, either subtenants or sharecroppers, who happen to be the lowest rank of this whole agrarian relationship. So in that process, again, that unequal relationship one can see among this group of people within this cultivation or the land relationship. As I was saying, sharecroppers or the people who were working in somebody's land, the farmer who had land but he did not have the human resource. And so there were many people who were without land, and so they ended up as just merely as agricultural laborers. And agricultural laborers were broadly divided into 3 types. Some were holding small plot of land, and that was not providing the food, or the produce was not enough for the whole family, and so they had to depend on their agricultural labor, I mean their own labor. So they were going and working with somebody's land. So though they had small amount of land, they had to work with somebody's land in order to supplement their food. Second group was, they were completely landless, who lived exclusively on hiring out their own labor. They did not have land, and so they had to depend on their own human resource, whether it is individuals or different individuals of the family. So in that process, what happened, this also created like something like bonded labor. Because they did not have land, they did not have any source to survive or to food, they did not have sources of their livelihood. They had to mortgage their labor, or sometimes they had to surrender some of the family members in another family, like big landlord or big zamindars, which ended up like bonded labor. And so one can see, though the bonded labor has been abolished, historically we can see that there was a huge number of rural landless people ended up as bonded laborers, or their families remained as bonded laborers for years. Now, third category of agricultural laborer, one can see that it is almost equal to bonded laborer or semi-bonded laborer. Like some of the communities like Dublas or Halis in Gujarat and Padiyals in Tamil Nadu. They were kind of years and sometimes generations, they were remaining as bonded laborer for or semi-bonded laborer with some certain kind of families. And so what happened that even if they could think of rescuing themselves or freeing themselves from this relationship, it was impossible for them to escape from this kind of relationship, because at the time of crisis, at the time of insufficiency of their food, or at the time of their economic crisis, they had borrowed something. They had borrowed either for food, or they had borrowed either money or food or other kind of resources for other purposes. And so they are not in a position to repay that, either money or other whatever food they had taken from the big landowners. They ended up as selling or mortgaging their labor for generations and generations. And so there are continuous, as I was telling, the continuous bonded labor or bondage of human beings in our rural Indian society. And so this emerged as one of the social problems in our Indian society, especially in the rural Indian society. There is another group in our rural India one can see, and they are the artisans. Our Indian society, especially the rural India, had full of artisans groups. We have different handicrafts, different services, like bamboo workers, blacksmiths, potters. They all are part of our Indian society, or the village, Indian village community. For instance, carpenter or the blacksmith or the potter, they provided the services to the villagers, the village communities. And these service providers remain for generations, providing services to the village community. And so there was a kind of patron relationship between the service receivers and the service providers. So all the artisans provided the services to the villagers, and the villagers received the services of these potters or the blacksmiths. And so this kind of relationship, which generally termed sociologically as Jajmani system. So this Jajmani system in rural India, one can find basically the relationship between the service providers and the service receivers. It is kind of patron relationship. So the service receivers patronize certain kind of services like blacksmith. Now throughout the year, the blacksmith will provide the services to the farmers in order to plow the land, sharpening their equipments, either their axe or other kind of plowing equipments. In the same way, carpenters will provide all throughout the year all the necessary services in order to repair their house or repair their other kind of equipments or implements in the domestic use. And in return, the service receivers will provide either a piece of land in return of their services, or at the time of harvesting, these service providers will go and collect certain amount of paddy or the vegetables or certain kind of return. So whatever amount of services they provide throughout the year, at the end of the year, the service receivers provide certain kind of return, mostly in kind, either it is in terms of paddy, in terms of vegetables, or sometimes as a piece of land to cultivate in return of their services. And so this kind of patron relationship is another very, very important institutions one can find in our Indian society, which is based on this kind of patron relationship. And one can find that this kind of relationship one would find in almost all the Indian villages, and so many families are dependent on this service provision. And so these artisans groups are part of this kind of system, who are not necessarily the landholders, not necessarily economically powerful, and so they continue as service providers as part of the Jajmani system. And this Jajmani system is actually hereditary. Once my forefathers provided these services to the village, I continue to provide this service. My children will continue to provide these services. So it is hereditary. Irrespective of caste, irrespective of any specialized occupation, every occupation, every service providers continue to provide these services to the community, the village community, for generations. And though there has been several studies conducted on the Jajmani system in India, one has to look at that how this social structure of Jajmani system holds on to this occupational based or the service based social structure. In a way, it holds on to this relationship, social relationship based on this service, and as it remains hereditary, sometimes it becomes very difficult to get out of this relationship. It becomes very difficult to get out of this structure, and it becomes hindrance for their social mobility also. For example, if a family provided the services of blacksmith or pottery for generations, and suddenly the next generation says, no, I want to go for studies, and I do not want to continue the pottery or the continued carpentry. And in that process, now the villagers can ostracize them and isolate them, saying that, no, how can you stop providing services to this village, which your forefathers have provided services for generations. And so this Jajmani system, as it is very structured, very fixed, based on the hereditary conditions, generations to generations, it continues, it becomes very difficult, and sometimes it becomes hindrance for their social mobility for the next generations. Many times, especially the priestly class, like Brahmins. Now, Brahmins used to provide the religious services, either it is worshipping in the temple, or going and performing the marriage ceremony, or providing any kind of religious services. Even they had, even if they were very higher caste, they also had this kind of judgment. They were part of the judgmental relationship. It is not only services like blacksmith or carpentry or the pottery, but services like Brahmins or the religious services were also part of the judgmental system. And so they were in return provided, as I was saying, this kind of services by the served people or the people who were received their services. How do we differentiate between the caste or tribe, which is based on ethnicity, and the class? Our Indian society, as in the previous lesson discussed, that it is mostly caste-based society, which is determined based on the ethnicity. However, as I was telling, based on the economic factor, based on the Marxian analysis, now there are also looked at how Indian society can also be analyzed based on the means of production or based on economy, as I was discussing earlier. And so how do we see the difference between caste or the tribe, which is based on, which is looked at mostly as an ethnic category, and the class, which is not ethnic category, which is basically the economic category. So if we look at between these two categories, one can see that caste or tribe, which is mostly ethnic category, are very, very hereditary. If one belongs to, or if one is born in a particular caste or in a particular tribe, remains part of that social category. He or she is born, children are again reborn and remains part of the same caste or same tribe. So it is hereditary. Whereas in class category, if you look at, it is based on the economic category. So today, one is poor. Economically, one might be poor, but tomorrow he might or she might be very rich. And so he or she might belong to different class. So it is not hereditary. So today's poor can be tomorrow's rich man or rich woman. And so based on the class, one can see that he or she can be very high class or the middle class or the lower class. Whereas in terms of caste or tribe, one can see that they belong to this caste or this tribe, and which determines, okay, Brahmin or Kshatriya or Vaishya, and so on and so forth. Similarly among the tribes, either one belongs to this tribe or that tribe, remains as part of that tribe, born again and again as part of that tribe. Whereas in the class category, one changes, it goes beyond that kind of rigid social structure which binds them to get out or to come out of that kind of structure. Based on the economic power, one can go to the higher class or the middle class, or can remain social class. And so it is caste and tribe category is closed. It is very closed because it is, one is born and reborn part of this same class, same caste or same tribe. Whereas in the class category, it is open for the mobility. Today's scheduled caste or scheduled tribe person can have the mobility into the higher class. Or a Brahmin caste because of the poor economic capability, might belong to the lower economic class. So it provides that kind of mobility, open mobility for the people who belong, who depending on the economic capacity. And so caste and tribe category is based on the socio-cultural factors, socio-cultural characteristics, traditions, values, culture, language. These are all socio-cultural characteristics which determines a particular community, a particular caste. Whether it is settled caste, whether it is settled tribe, or whether it is Brahmin, each of these community have their own traditions and history, culture, traditions. Sometimes food pattern, sometimes dressing pattern. They have got their own traditions. Whereas in the class category, we see that it is based on the economic category. Whether you have money, whether you have resources, you can control the means of production. So it depends on that. And the next one is, one can see that what are the changes taking place within these categories called caste or tribe. I'm especially focusing on caste and tribe because most of the rural masses belong to caste and tribe. And so, what are the changes taking place? One of the very, very dynamic changes which is coming, or which the caste tribes are experiencing, is Sanskritization. The famous sociologist Srinivasan's concept of Sanskritization, where the lower caste always aspired to imitate, aspire to live like the higher caste. How he or she can improve in terms of food, in terms of housing, in terms of dresses, in terms of living style. Always try to improvise, always try to imitate the higher caste. And so today the castes and tribes are trying to imitate others, those who are so-called people of higher caste or people of mainstream. At the same time, in case of tribes, they are trying to assimilate with the mainstream society. Similarly, issue of urbanization and industrialization, a huge amount of urbanization and industrialization. With the urbanization and industrialization, one can see the large number of rural population becoming part of the larger industrial processes. And in that process, they are going through the different kind of experiences. Westernization, along with Westernization, modernization is taking place, which is another very, very important factor which has been experienced by these rural masses. At the same time, along with all these factors, Indian Constitution provides democratization process, and so the political participation through this democratization process is another very, very important factor which has come for the rural masses. The people who were never been part of the power, they are able to participate in the political processes, and they have been part of the political processes or power processes, decision-making processes. And so the Indian Constitution has provided different kind of protective measures like untouchability, like bonded labor, like money lending. So there are many, many laws and legislation to protect from this kind of historical and age-old social problems. And different kind of development provisions have been provided through different schemes, different policies, so that the people who were marginalized or the people who are vulnerable for their historical and cultural and social factors, how they can be provided provisions for the fast socio-economic development. Thank you, and I would suggest that for your future reading, for more understanding, you can look at the e-text and the references which are provided as part of this e-text. Thank you.